Absolutely. Here's a warm and relatable 500-word story centered around the topic. Top 6 guilty pleasures in old age and why you should indulge before it's too late. Harold's Sweet Life. 6 guilty pleasures he refused to give up and why you shouldn't either. At 82, Harold had heard it all before. Watch your sugar, cut down on red meat, limit screen time. But after losing his wife, working hard for decades, and raising 4 kids, Harold came to a bold conclusion. It's okay to enjoy life's guilty pleasures, especially now. His philosophy wasn't about recklessness, it was about balance, and more importantly, joy. 1. Chocolate for breakfast? Why not? Every morning, Harold had a small square of dark chocolate with his coffee. Better than vitamins, he joked. It wasn't just the taste, it was the ritual, the luxury of starting his day with something purely for himself. 2. Long afternoon naps. He used to feel guilty dozing off in the middle of the day. Now, he embraced it. A warm blanket, a soft chair, and 45 minutes of peaceful rest made him feel sharper, happier. The world can wait, he'd say. 3. Watching old westerns on repeat. His kids teased him for it. Dad, you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly 20 times. But Harold didn't care. Those dusty saloons, dramatic standoffs, and Ennio Morricone scores were comforting, like visiting an old friend. 4. Eating what he loves, in moderation. After years of watching his diet, Harold decided to stop denying himself the joy of a good burger or slice of pie. I don't need it every day, he said, but I'll enjoy it when I do. He found that occasional indulgence made him appreciate food more, not less. 5. Saying what's on his mind. In his younger years, Harold held his tongue a lot. He avoided conflict, let things go. But now, he spoke freely, with kindness, but with honesty. If he didn't like something, he said it. If he loved someone, he made sure they knew. Why hold back? He asked. Life's too short for guesswork. 6. Spending money on experiences, not things. Harold took a weekend train trip with an old friend, splurged on concert tickets to see a jazz band he loved, and even paid for a spontaneous painting class. Memories matter more than stuff, he told his grandchildren. Don't wait for the perfect time. Go make a memory today. For Harold, these guilty pleasures weren't about indulgence. They were about living. So many people waited their whole lives to finally enjoy themselves, only to run out of time or energy. He didn't want that to be his story. You've got to enjoy the small things before they become the missed things, he liked to say. And so each day, Harold built joy into his routine, not as a reward, but as a way of life. Because in the end, guilt was no match for gratitude, and pleasure, when savored with intention, was one of the purest forms of wisdom. Would you like to turn a quote from Harold's story into a voiceover sample? Certainly. Here's an additional 500-word paragraph that continues Harold's story, offering more depth and reflection on the value of embracing joy in old age. As the years passed, Harold's guilty pleasures became something of a legend among his neighbors and friends. New retirees would stop by for advice, expecting financial tips or health routines. Instead, Harold offered stories about how he danced barefoot in his kitchen to old jazz records, how he tried sushi for the first time at 78, and how he took a spontaneous road trip with no destination, just a cooler of sandwiches and a good playlist. Don't plan every detail, he'd say. Leave space for surprises. One afternoon, he hosted a backyard gathering for a few neighbors, complete with grilled ribs, peach cobbler, and lemonade spiked just slightly with bourbon. Sitting under the string lights he'd hung himself, Harold looked around at the laughter, the mingling generations, and the simple happiness of a summer evening. This, he said aloud, is why we don't wait. He often spoke about regret, not in a sorrowful way, but as a caution. He'd seen too many people save their fun for retirement only to find their bodies too tired or their minds too burdened by loss to enjoy it. Joy doesn't have to be earned, he'd say. It just has to be welcomed. Even his doctor noticed. Despite a few age-related challenges, Harold's blood pressure stayed steady. His mood was optimistic, his memory sharp. "You're doing something right," she told him. Harold simply smiled. He knew the answer was in the little things: pleasure, presence, purpose. He began encouraging his grandchildren to live the same way, not recklessly, but richly. When his oldest granddaughter was debating whether to take a job overseas, Harold sat her down. "What are you afraid of?" he asked. "Missing out," she said, "and also failing." Harold nodded. "You'll always miss something, but the worst thing to miss is the version of yourself that's brave enough to try." And when his neighbor Louise, recently widowed, asked how he managed to keep smiling, he offered her a plate of cookies and a seat on his porch. "I miss my wife every single day," he said, "but I honor her by not giving up on joy. She wouldn't want me to sit in silence forever." Harold had found his rhythm. He didn't apologize for second helpings, for sleeping in on rainy days, or for singing off-key during Sunday morning chores. He had stopped measuring life by what was productive or impressive and started measuring it by what was meaningful. In a world that often told older people to slow down, step aside, or be quiet, Harold chose instead to celebrate. And in doing so, he reminded everyone around him, young and old, that guilty pleasures aren't guilty at all when they bring peace, connection, and delight. Because in the end, Harold believed it's not the extra years that make a good life. It's the extra moments we choose to truly live. Would you like to create a voiceover sample from a quote in Harold's story? Certainly. Here's a final 200-word paragraph that rounds out Harold's story with reflection and a touch of legacy. In his quieter moments, Harold often sat on the same wooden bench in his garden, notebook in hand. He wasn't much of a writer, but he'd begun jotting down his favorite memories, lessons, and little philosophies, things he hoped his grandkids would read one day. "Take the trip," he scribbled once. "Eat the pie, say the thing." It wasn't meant to be profound, just real. He understood now that joy didn't come from grand achievements or waiting for the perfect time. It came from saying yes to life's small invitations: a walk at sunset, a spontaneous phone call, singing in the car. His notebook became a patchwork of wisdom, reminders to live now rather than later. And even as his hands grew slower and his steps a bit less steady, his spirit stayed full of movement. Harold didn't pretend he wasn't aging. He simply chose not to age with regret. He had loved, he had laughed, and he had indulged in every pleasure that made life sweet. And when his family asked what kept him so content, he always answered the same way: "Don't wait to be happy. The time to enjoy life isn't someday, it's today." Would you like to turn one of Harold's quotes into a voiceover sample?